Okay, so in our last exercise, we looked at two different color wheels, and these are the secondary colors, right? So when you combine, let's say, the yellow and the blue, you get green, right? So then we want to make the tertiary colors now. So in other words, what if you had a green, but it was more towards the yellow, or it was more towards the blue? Alrighty. So here, for example, we've got a yellow green and a blue green. But we also want to look at the complementary colors. So for instance, if we have yellow over here on the opposite side of the color wheel, we'd have violet or purple. Those are opposite each other. They complete the color wheel, and so they're called complementary. And when I say that they complete the color wheel, let's look at this. So if you had purple, right, and you had blue, and you had red, that made up purple. And then you combine that with the yellow, that's a complete color wheel, isn't it? Because it's got all three of your primary colors. So that's the complementary colors. And they're very, very powerful to know how to use these. Let's take a look. So if you've got your, let's say your blue-green here, your yellow-green here, you can also do one more thing. That is that you could mix red, the complement, into the green, and you get more of a khaki green here, or a burnt orange, or a dirty purple, something like that, right? Also, that's where we get our browns and our darks. So let's take a look. I'll go ahead and run through this worksheet, just like I did with the other one. Let's see what happens. So the first thing that I'm going to take a look at is doing these darks right here. So dark, usually people are thinking about black. But dark is a better way of thinking about it. So for instance, I could take my darker blue, that would be the ultramarine, and start there. Black is really just all of the colors mixed together and in perfect balance. Right? So I'll have blue there and I'll have blue here. Right? That's what black is. And brown is all of the colors mixed together, but not in perfect balance. That's where you get your browns. And we can do that on purpose, right? So anyways, I've started with my dark here. And so with this one, I'll go ahead and add some red into it. I'm just going to use this cadmium red right here. And we're going to get that nice dark purple color. So that's already a very dark color. But let's see what happens when we add just a bit of the yellow into it. And I mean just a little bit, right? You'll see that it turns basically black. That's a very, very nice, balanced, dark color. But we can come at it from other ways because this is just all the different primary colors put together. So on this one, basically, I had a purple and I used its complementary color of yellow to balance it and get my dark or my black. Here, I'm going to go ahead and I'll make a green. So my blue and my yellow, making a green. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the complementary color of green? Well, when we look on the color wheel, we see that the opposite of green is red. So to my green, I'll just add some red. Let's see what happens. Just a little bit. And you can see I get a very, very beautiful dark here. Now, if your dark tended to go more towards yellow, well, then you would add a little bit of purple to it. If it went more green, you'd add a little bit more red to it. If it went more blue, a little bit of orange. You see where we're going with this. If it was a little bit orange, like this is a little bit browner, then I might add a little bit more blue back into it, and then that's going to balance it out. Going a little bit green now, so now a little bit of red. And I'm okay with this. This is a cooler dark. This is a warmer dark. Both these things are going to be a lot more natural than just a straight up black out of the tube. I'm going to start doing my greens now. So I'm going to start with yellow because it's always a good idea to mix into the lighter color. And to this one, I'll go ahead and add a little bit of the blue. This time I'll use the ultramarine. And if it's not as blue as I'd like it, I can just add more blue to it. So there we see a really beautiful blue-green. And it was very easy to add more blue into the yellow and have it be effective. It'd be very difficult to add more yellow into the blue and have that be effective. So now for the yellow-green, I think I'll go ahead and dip my brush and get a little bit more fresh yellow there. And I'll choose my cyan right here because it's tending more towards the yellow to begin with. Now be careful because if I get this too blue, it's going to be very difficult to get it back to being the more yellow. So here you can see just the smallest amount of that cyan, just tiny, turn the yellow into a nice spring green. Now let's see what happens when we add red into green and get sort of a khaki color. Now I've got what I'd consider a fairly medium green. It's a little towards the yellow side, but that'll be all right. And I'm going to take some of my cadmium red and mix that into it. Just the smallest dot of red, if you can see that there. Tiny, just on the tip of my brush. And you can see how just that tiniest drop of red, dot of red really changed the nature and made that much more of a khaki green. Let's see what happens with the oranges. This time I'll go ahead and I'll start with my warmer yellow right here, just for the heck of it, although it really wouldn't matter. Okay, and so to my yellow, I'll add just a hint of red. Remember, I can always add more, but just that tiny little bit. So you can see that even the tiniest drop of red was really able to change that to much more red-orange. Here, if I wanted to go even more red, just the tiniest bit more, and you see that is definitely a very red-orange. Now I'm going to take the paint that's just left on the brush, so not much at all, and I'm going to mix it into this yellow here to give me a very yellow-orange. So once again, just so little bit of that red, just the residue that was left on my brush. And if I want to brighten it up a little bit, I'll just go ahead and add a little bit more yellow into it. So a little bit of this lemon yellow here, and you can see it's brightening that up a little bit. But it took kind of a lot because the yellow is not near as strong as the red. So a lot of yellow to a very little bit of red, but we've got a very yellowy orange now. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we work in the complementary color of blue into our orange. So there's a nice medium orange. I think I'll mix in this cyan with it, and let's see what happens. Just a dot, just a dot on the corner of my brush of that cyan. So you can see with a very little bit of that blue added into it, we've got a nice burnt orange color. Now let's do the violet or purple. I'm going to start with my magenta and then mix my blue and or my reds into it. Okay, so we see that the magenta is a much stronger color than the yellow, so it's probably going to take a little bit more blue to change the color than it did when I was making either the orange or the greens. But in any case, I'll still just start off with just a dot of color on my paintbrush here, because I can always add more. It's hard to add less. So it took almost equal parts of paint, but I've got a nice blue-violet right here. So let's go ahead and make a red-violet. I'll start by adding a little bit of blue into this because I do want to make it more of a violet or a purple rather than the magenta. But just a dot. And then maybe a little bit more of the magenta just to keep it all nice and moist. Okay, and to this rather balanced violet or purple, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a little bit of the cadmium red. Just a drop. So that's pretty good, but if I want to push it even more, then I can add just even a little bit more of that red into it. And you can see that I have a violet that's much more towards the red than this one, which is much more towards the blue. After making a pretty balanced violet, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of the yellow. I think I'll go ahead and add a little bit of this cadmium yellow into it because I'm trying to make more of a dirty purple or of a more burnt color. As you can see, the yellow is not near as strong, so I keep having to add a little bit more, not like when I was working with these. But that's pretty good. I don't want to turn it into a brown. I want it to stay in the violet range. Now let's go ahead and make some browns. I'm going to start with a golden brown, then more of what I'd call a milk chocolate or a medium brown, and then what I'd call a dark chocolate or a darker brown. With all of these, since I want to make a brown and not a black or a dark, I'm going to go ahead and start with my yellow. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and start with this one here, this cadmium yellow. Okay, so the golden brown is very easy to make. I'm just going to go ahead and take some of my magenta, just a dot, and mix it in. Let's see what happens. As you can see, that was a really easy brown to make. And it makes sense because if I've got this yellow and the magenta is almost like a purple. And remember, purple would be the opposite of the yellow, so very much like a complementary color, just in and of itself. Now let's go ahead and make the medium brown. Once again, after having the yellow in here, I could add a little bit of the magenta in, just to start darkening it up. As you can see, I'm starting to get an orange color because of the amount of red that's in this magenta. And it was used pretty heavily. So now the opposite of orange is blue. So maybe I'll just take a little bit of this cyan blue and add it in. Let's see what happens. As you can see, we've got a nice medium brown, something like milk chocolate. So let's go ahead and make the dark brown. I think I'm going to re-moisten this area with just a little bit more yellow. And this time when I add the red into it, I think I'll go ahead and I'm going to use the cadmium red. Just a little dot. I can always add more. So you can see, whereas before I had a nice medium orange or even a yellow orange, this time I have a nice red orange here. So to this, I'll go ahead and add the blue. But this time, since I want it to be darker, I'll add the ultramarine instead of the cyan. So I added the equivalent amount of blue a couple of times until I got it nice and dark. And so there we got a nice dark chocolatey sort of brown out of it. And once again, if something goes to green, add red. If something goes to blue, add orange. If something goes to purple, add yellow. And that's how you'll get it. As you can see, with just the warm and the cool primaries, you can make just about any color that you could imagine or think of, including some very good darks and some very good browns.